In the spring of 2025, a geopolitical shock hit the peaceful border between the US and Canada. What had long been the world's friendliest international boundary suddenly became the center of a crisis that no one saw coming. For generations, the border was a symbol of trust, a line that barely felt like a line at all, until everything changed almost overnight. For decades, the Alaska Highway symbolized friendship, connecting the US to Alaska through Canada. This vital artery, stretching over 1,300 miles, was more than just a road. It was a lifeline for families, truckers, and adventurers, a testament to the cooperation between two nations. Every year, thousands of Americans and Canadians traveled its length, forging memories and business ties along the way. Suddenly, Canada began restricting access on key routes to Alaska. Roadblocks appeared overnight, and travelers found themselves facing unexpected detours and delays. The sense of freedom that once defined the border was replaced by uncertainty and frustration. President Trump responded with outrage, calling it a hostile act and escalating a trade dispute into a diplomatic crisis. The White House issued stern warnings, and the media buzzed with speculation about what might come next. Tensions between the two countries, once unthinkable, were now headline news. Confusion reigned at remote border crossings as truckers and families found routes closed or subject to strict inspections. Long lines formed at checkpoints that had rarely seen more than a handful of cars. People who depended on the border for work, family, or medical care were left in limbo, unsure when or if they'd be allowed to cross. To Americans, it felt like Canada had slammed the door shut. The suddenness of the move left many feeling betrayed by a neighbor they'd always trusted. Social media filled with stories of ruined plans and desperate attempts to find alternate routes. Canadian officials claimed it was about environmental and safety concerns, but few believed the official line. The explanations seemed thin, especially given the timing and the specific routes targeted. Many suspected there was more to the story than what was being said publicly. The timing and targets made it clear. This was retaliation, a calculated move in a high-stakes game. Political analysts debated the real motives on nightly news, while both governments traded barbs and threats. The border, once a symbol of unity, had become a pawn in a much larger struggle. Canada was sending a message. Cooperation could no longer be assumed. The era of easy passage and open arms was over, replaced by suspicion and brinkmanship. The world watched as two allies drifted further apart. The once quiet border was now a front line, with access to Alaska suddenly in jeopardy. Security was ramped up, and the landscape transformed almost overnight. What was once routine now felt risky and unpredictable. For the first time in living memory, America's path to its own state was blocked by its closest ally, setting the stage for unpredictable consequences. The world could only watch and wonder. What would happen next, now that the Great White North had shut the door? The border crisis that would soon grip two nations didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the result of years of simmering tensions, political maneuvering, and economic threats that had been building beneath the surface for months, if not years. Its roots lay in escalating trade disputes and President Trump's renewed threats of a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian goods in March 2025. The announcement sent shockwaves through both countries, reigniting old wounds and sparking new fears about the future of cross-border relations. This time, Canada, led by a resolute Prime Minister Trudeau, refused to back down or be intimidated. Trudeau's government was determined to show strength, signaling a new era of assertiveness in Canadian foreign policy. Even before the US tariffs could take effect, Trudeau's cabinet announced a bold plan to retaliate, vowing to protect Canadian interests at any cost. The message was clear: Canada would not be bullied. Canada's new strategy was as unexpected as it was clever. Use its vast geography as leverage, focusing on Alaska's unique dependence on Canadian transit routes for essential supplies and travel. The looming US tariffs threatened to devastate key Canadian industries, lumber, aluminum, and agriculture, putting thousands of jobs and entire communities at risk. The stakes had never been higher for Canadian workers and their families. In response, Canada identified Alaska's isolation as America's hidden vulnerability. The state's remoteness, surrounded by Canadian territory, suddenly became a powerful bargaining chip. Every year, thousands of Americans and Canadians rely on the highways that snake through Canada to reach Alaska for everything from tourism to vital shipments of food and fuel. Recognizing this, Canada decided to squeeze this pressure point, signaling it was willing to restrict access and disrupt the flow of goods and people to Alaska. Rhetoric on both sides quickly escalated, with politicians and diplomats trading barbs and accusations, poisoning what little diplomatic goodwill remained between the two neighbors. Across Canada, public anger grew. Protesters demanded a tougher stance, and for the first time, geography itself became a weapon in the trade war. The unimaginable soon became reality. Canada began restricting access to Alaska, leaving travelers stranded and sending shockwaves through both countries. Canada's response to the growing tensions was both strategic and highly decentralized, reflecting the country's unique federal structure. Rather than relying solely on a top-down approach, the Canadian government empowered its provinces to take decisive action, allowing for a flexible and regionally tailored response. Ottawa set the overall tone, signaling a firm stance, but it was provinces like British Columbia that truly led the charge, taking bold steps that would ripple across the country. Premier David Eby, determined to protect provincial interests, introduced sweeping legislation to impose heavy tolls on vehicles traveling to or from Alaska. These tolls were not just a financial burden, they sent a clear political message. In addition, BC government agencies abruptly halted all purchases of American products, sending shockwaves through cross-border trade and local businesses that relied on U.S. imports. Liquor stores across the province stopped selling drinks from Republican-led states, a move that was both symbolic and practical, further tightening the economic screws. Inspired by BC, Yukon quickly followed suit, restricting access for U.S. businesses and making it increasingly difficult for American companies to operate in the territory. Yukon officials ordered the removal of American products from store shelves, leaving many local shops with empty spaces and customers searching for alternatives. The most disruptive move came in May, when both BC and Yukon began closing key sections of the Alaska Highway. Officials cited environmental reviews and the need for First Nations consultations, but the timing was unmistakable. Officially, these actions were described as regulatory recalibration. In reality, they amounted to a de facto blockade, halting the flow of goods and people. Trucks were delayed for days, supply chains were thrown into chaos, and supermarket shelves began to empty. The message was unmistakable. Passage through Canada was now a privilege, not a right. By empowering its provinces, Canada created a multi-front defense that was difficult for the U.S. to counter, as each region could act independently and unpredictably. The vast, rugged Canadian landscape itself became a strategic asset, making enforcement and navigation even more challenging for outsiders. The U.S. now faced a complex, decentralized resistance, one that was as much about geography and local power as it was about politics. President Trump's reaction was immediate and furious. He blasted Trudeau as weak and accused Canada of hostile actions, framing the dispute as an attack on American sovereignty. Trump used the crisis to energize his base, promising that such an affront would never stand. Reports surfaced that Trump privately threatened extreme measures, even military action to secure transit routes. His public statements left little room for negotiation, escalating the conflict. The world watched as a regional trade dispute was recast as a global spectacle. Trump's rhetoric pushed the U.S.-Canada relationship to the brink. For Alaska's 734,000 residents, the crisis was personal. While most cargo arrives by sea, land routes through Canada are vital for fresh produce, medical supplies, and oil industry equipment. Canadian restrictions and toll threats caused immediate anxiety and logistical nightmares. Truckers faced delays and rerouting, driving up costs for perishable goods and raising prices for consumers. Military families, seasonal workers, and travelers were turned back, their plans upended. Alaskans felt isolated and frustrated, caught in a political battle far beyond their control. The U.S. sought its own leverage and found it in the cruise ship industry. Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan led a push to waive the Passenger Vessel Services Act. allowing cruise ships to bypass Canadian ports. Normally, foreign flagged ships must stop in Canada en route to Alaska, injecting millions into BC's tourism economy. The proposed waiver threatened to devastate BC's summer tourism. A similar waiver had been used during the pandemic, making the threat credible. The US aimed its economic firepower at BC, escalating the standoff. Premier Eby faced a tough choice: hold firm or risk massive losses. The conflict now involved not just highways, but the entire cross-border economy. As tensions rose, leaders and citizens spoke out. Trump's rhetoric was uncompromising, vowing not to be pushed around. Canadian leaders like Yukon's Ranj Pillai and BC's Nikki Sharma framed their actions as defending sovereignty and economic well-being. On the ground, frustration grew. Alaskan truckers lamented lost income and spoiled cargo, feeling like collateral damage. Yukon residents saw the American reaction as overblown, remarking, "It's just a few closed roads. Leave it to American politics to turn it into World War III." The disconnect between political rhetoric and daily reality was stark. At its heart, the dispute was about sovereignty. Canada asserted its right to control its territory, pointing out that no agreement guaranteed the US unfettered access to Alaska. The restrictions were a response to years of perceived American overreach. For Canadians, it was about being treated as an equal, not a junior partner. The US, meanwhile, saw any obstruction as an intolerable infringement on its integrity. Trump's rhetoric tapped into American exceptionalism and the need to protect national interests. The clash exposed the fragile foundations of the Canada-US relationship. Both nations were forced to confront uncomfortable questions about power, dependence, and identity. By summer 2025, the dispute had settled into a tense stalemate. The crisis exposed deep fissures in the Canada-US relationship. Both sides faced economic pain, Alaska with supply chain threats, BC with a looming tourism crisis. The conflict showed how quickly trust can erode and how easily peaceful partnerships can unravel. Rebuilding trust will be slow and difficult. The border, once a symbol of friendship, now stands as a warning. The urgent task: rediscover shared interests before every disagreement becomes a new crisis.